Knitting is so cool because as you knit, you can create the whole fabric as you go, which means you can make it into many interesting shapes.
I never think about that you're actually making fabric. I guess because it's not often that you cut and sew knitted fabric together. You mostly are just creating it into the shape that you want. That's very cool to think about all the different shapes that could be incorporated into your knitting.
Yeah, and if you want to cut your knitting into that shape, be aware that will also soon change its shape because unless you have reinforced those stitches, they're going to be running away from you pretty quick. Much better to knit it in the shape that you want. And one item in particular that pretty much you can make any shape of anymore that I've seen are shawls. They seemingly come in any shape, Jim.
Yeah, a U shape or a big old triangle shape or rectangular shapes.
Circles, waves, all sorts of things that aren't even lying flat. It's crazy. You could even knit a shawl for a knit gnome.
Oh, for
It's
those little gnomes? What episode was that?
just a few weeks ago, and we'll make sure to link that if you haven't seen it yet. Super worth watching.
Knitting little teeny tiny shawls for all of them. Let's do it.
Let's dive in this week and talk all about the magic that shapes summon in our knitting. Light from Lantern presents Knit a Spell. I'm magical maker Katie Rempe.
And I'm the maker of magic, James Devine.
Join us as we stitch together the symbiotic relationship between crafting
And the craft.
All right, first I want to know, Jim, do you have a favorite shape?
I love the ellipse, which is an
Oh.
oval or an egg shape. I like it when it's a little narrow on one side and wider on the other. The egg shape, the ellipse, is my favorite shape. Maybe that's because I think about the orbit of objects around the sun or around each other in space.
Hmm.
And just this idea of you can sling something around and it's very rare that it will be in a perfect circle. Most of the time, it's some sort of an ellipse. When I'm painting or drawing, I can be more accurate in the blocking in of a human form
Mm.
if it's all ellipses and no lines. I think that all of nature is just a series of ellipses.
Yeah, rounded edges. You're
Yeah.
so right.
What about you? What's your favorite shape?
It's funny that you say ellipse because my favorite shape is a circle.
It's
But
a
I like it perfect. I want
it's
them
like
like
a perfect
bubbles.
ellipse. You want a
Exactly.
perfect circle.
Yes. Do you have any theories on why shapes seem to have different magical abilities or powers?
First off, I think it's a psychological phenomenon. Human beings often will make meaning out of random occurrences. This is something called pareidolia, which is our ability to see faces in the clouds or a rabbit in the clouds or something like that. Or we'll often see faces in the front end of cars, or we'll see faces in all kinds of things, the bark of a tree. This is a natural human ability to say, oh, if there's a shape that reminds me of, or that's
Hmm.
related to. And in a lot of cases, it really is related to something. So if you think about seeing a hexagon,
Oh, yeah.
that hexagon shape, we see that in the beehive. Bees are so important to nature and we're a source of sustenance and sweetener and food for people. And so when we see that hexagon, it can have that meaning of sweetness. There can be a lot of meanings with that shape. So I think
Hmm.
that's also part of it is things we see in nature and the things we see around us can give that
Oh.
meaning.
We've talked about this in the past, and another example that thought of was the ring, right? We use it to symbolize no end because there's no end. I think that's another area where we don't even think about it, but obviously it has made its way into everyone's subconscious.
That's right.
And so then I guess it makes sense that sacred geometry is such a thing.
I think yeah, sacred geometry likely started with that sort of association with the natural world, the spiral of a nautilus shell or of a fiddlehead of a fern, which is a new growth of a fern. We see spirals, well, in all kind of shells when we cut them open, or we'll see other shapes in nature and we'll make associations based on what that represents to us or the meaning we put on it. And I think over time, a lot of those sort of golden ratio shapes that we see in nature, we will extrapolate from there on pen and paper. So you start to have people examine the spiral and the ever increasing distance of the lines in a spiral and look at the mathematical or the even before math was that advanced, the geometric properties of those shapes. And you start to experiment with stars and with circles and triangles and all those things together. You start to realize that they have relationships with each other, they have mathematical relationships, and it can actually get almost spiritual, kind of spooky, the way that different shapes will interact with each other and what might happen if you put them together or try to make a repeating pattern. So that I think was a big area of exploration with Pythagoras and with other mathematicians in much earlier times. So the sacredness of it can be adopted with that symbolism. In Catholicism or in the church, there was the symbolism of the cross. There was the symbolism of the star, all kinds of things that were basic geometric shapes. So we see
Yeah.
the pentagram in papal seals up until the 1600s, 1700s. We see the pentagram or the interlaced star on cathedral rosettes, which is the big stained glass behind the altar at the front of the church. Because those were sacred symbols back then, they weren't associated with Satanism or anything nefarious until
Hmm.
recently, much, much recently in history.
Like you said, they all work together, these basic shapes. It's like when you're a kid and you're like, oh, this one goes into this hole. But then later you're like, but then these also fit together into different things. And I think for people who believe that we live in a hologram, this is like the repeating pattern evidence that they are speculating is all part of it. And that's why everything works together and has these energies, is because it's all part of how things are made around us.
When you start to get higher than that into the math, you start to realize what happens if I make, even simply, if I make a 5-pointed star, like you do on your paper, like you give someone a good job. What if I did a 7-pointed star? Oh, what
Hmm.
does that mean? What is the power of that number of seven and what might that mean? What if it was a
Yes.
9-pointed star? So you start to get into these different explorations into variations on the shapes. What if they interlace? What if they interlock in different ways? What if it's two triangles that are opposite each other and you make a Star of David or a Seal of Solomon? And then you do, whoa, I could do that with 8 or I could do that with 10. So the even
Yeah.
numbers and the odd numbers and the different ways that you can make those into stars or make them into 3D shapes. The fun with these things are endless.
Yeah. And if you can find the art of the math in that, it really is fun. I geek out on sacred geometry a lot
Yeah,
as a knitwear designer because I'm always trying to translate those things into my knitting. And since it's
right.
all math, it's pretty easy if you have a little bit of creativity to make that into a actual knitted object, which is pretty fun.
I see something in 3D, but if I'm going to flatten it out and make it into fabric, what would that look like? How would I math that up? I wonder about things like mandalas. Like my husband is currently crocheting a very large round rug blanket, like a blanket, and each 2 or 3 inch part has a very distinct pattern, a scalloped pattern or a bubble or all kinds of things. And although it's crochet, it has a similar idea that he's making this fabric and eventually it's going to be like a picnic blanket or something to sit on. And it is completely a mandala. It's different
Mm.
colors and it's really cool. And so mandalas are often, they can be any shape, but a lot of times they're round and they have a series of spiritual symbolism in each area. I think about that with fabric and with knitting, that you can bring those together.
Even knitting, you can definitely do center out designs or from the out in, again, depending on your intention and the directionality of what you're doing. That could be that you want it to be drawn in versus going out.
And this is when we get to a spiral,
Mm.
you can knit a spiral if you're going from the center out. You can do it clockwise or counterclockwise, and those have different meanings.
Oh.
And I think we should talk about what those meanings are after our break.
My brain is already bubbling. I can't wait. We'll be right back. Hey there, fellow knitters. Are you ready to enchant your stitches with the power of color? Discover how in my online workshop, Knit with Color Magic. In Knit with Color Magic, you'll learn how to use color as an intention setting tool. This self-paced workshop will teach you everything you need to know to get out of your color ruts and conjure bewitching combinations while adding intention. You'll also learn how to build a strong and simple intention, how to translate intention into colors, and to develop a personal grimoire of color correspondences. With a simple shift in your mindset and some personal reflection, you can start knitting color magic into any project. And for a limited time, listeners of the show can save $20 off this workshop by using the code COLOR20 at checkout. Find all the information in the description or visit lightfromlantern.com/knit with color magic to learn more. Merry make!
Hey, Katie. So you've taken my intro to palmistry course, and I'm wondering, do you have any realizations as a result?
I realize that this entire time I have been a Muppet who uses their hands to express and emote. After taking your course, I've realized I've probably been giving away my own unconscious motivations this whole time.
But only to the people who know the divine hand palmistry method.
I gotta be in the know.
And if people are familiar with the divine hand method, your repeated gestures with your hands definitely give away your unconscious motivations. You can be a mind reader. Do you find that you can get insight into other people based on their hand gestures?
Oh, yes. I'm hyper aware of, is it the right hand where it's more of your outer personality? Is it the left hand that's featured, more of your inner personality? I am now overanalyzing everyone.
Especially as you come into election season, which seems to happen every year these days. It's so fun to watch for repeated gestures.
I highly recommend anyone who might be interested or curious in learning more about Intro to Palmistry to take Jim's brand new online course. It's self-paced and it's available at introtopalmistry.com. That's where you can find out more information and sign up. Hey Knit-a-Spell fans, we are back on Patreon with a new dedicated page. For just $5 a month, you'll gain access to behind-the-scenes posts, exclusive downloads and resources, and you'll be able to participate in influential polls with fellow fans. You'll also receive a free, exclusive Knit-a-Spell sticker sent right to your door after being a subscriber for 3 consecutive months. It's a great way to support the podcast, and Jim and I are so appreciative to everyone who's joined so far. To learn more and sign up, visit patreon.com/knit-a-spell. See you there.
When we went on the break, I left you with a little cliffhanger,
Tease.
which was if you knit clockwise versus counterclockwise. So in modern magical practice, that's sometimes called deosil clockwise, which is the way the sun goes, or widdershins is an interesting word, widdershins, which means counterclockwise. Traditionally, clockwise was thought to be the way that you would be spiraling in order to grow and increase and progress. It's traditionally seen as a more positive direction. And widdershins was seen as downward and undoing and had more of a pejorative or slightly negative implication. Of course, modern thinking, you realize neither one is good or bad. They're just different directions for different purposes.
There you go.
So I think of anti-clockwise or counterclockwise movement in a spiral to be cutting something out or a descent into an initiatory experience, like the story of the descent of Inanna, which is great to look up and read. So that is spiraling inwards and doing deeper work that's internal. So that's what I think about as anti-clockwise or widdershins movement. Clockwise movement is, I think, aligned with the progression in growth, the growth upwards, the path towards enlightenment. And it's symbolic of the cycles of life and seasons, things like that. If you're knitting something that is perhaps intended to bring you enlightenment and knowledge and growth, perhaps you want to knit it in a clockwise manner and use colors and maybe sparkly threads or whatever it is that would help with that intention. And if you want something that will have you be more internally focused, more deep, reflective, then you could do it in a counterclockwise manner and perhaps match the colors to that.
Oh, you could even put a reflective yarn in there. Take it real literal.
Yeah. So is that possible to do?
So traditionally, most people will knit from the right to the left, quote, right-handed.
So that would be counterclockwise?
You are correct. I'm making my brain think hard, and I think that is correct.
I have a clock on the wall, and whenever I think of it, I'm like, okay, counterclockwise is right to left, and
hmm
clockwise is left to right.
I never really considered this. So people who are left-handed usually learn how to knit right-handed. So we're all doing the same counterclockwise direction if we're going in the circle. However, there are some people that I know who were like, I'm not going to do that. And they taught themselves to knit the other way, which is a choice because then you
Good
just have to
job.
be careful to either translate all the patterns to go reflect or just be okay that everything is going to be the mirrored image of what is written. That is okay, but
If you're knitting words,
that would be a really interesting exercise for a person who's used to knitting in the counterclockwise direction to try to do it the other way, just for fun. That would be the reflective thing. You really would have to think about that.
I think it would be good for regular right-handed knitters to do it the other way
Yeah.
because we live in a right-handed world, as every lefty will tell you, and the right-hand dominance of the world. We even have negative words to say, where does the word sinister come from? It comes from the Italian word sinistra, which means left.
Mm.
So
Oh.
we have discouraged left-handed people for generations of trying to fix left-handed people and make them right. We even say when we're agreeing, we're like, "Oh, that's right."
Ooh, writing. We're never lefting.
Yeah,
Huh.
we're never
Interesting.
lefting. So I'm going
Hmm.
to say, yeah, that's left.
I like it. I feel like
That's
we
correct.
maybe had this conversation before.
You're absolutely left. We have.
Yes.
You're on the left path. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so when you knit in a spiral, what are you making? What can you do with that?
When we are knitting in a circle, we're really knitting in a spiral. So whether you are casting on something like we have here, the op art blanket, it's made from the center out. So you're really just layering row after row into the circle on your way out. So you're not actually just doing a circle, because if you did that, you would be done.
That op art blanket is super trippy. Why does it look like four triangles? Is it because of the slip stitches that sort of separate the sections?
In order to increase the shape, they have chosen to use 4 increases to get this, which is why in the end it looks like a square, like a weird square. And if you don't do some aggressive blocking, it will stay a weird square. That's because she did 4 perfectly spaced increases in the corners. Now, if she had done 8 or 9, that would have actually changed the overall shape. It would have been much more even.
So you could knit this as a spiral that's more circular,
Yep.
and it would have ended up as a round blanket instead of a square-ish. She's probably blocking that so that it's square and not as like bubbly square, right?
Yep, exactly. Because there are patterns out there that essentially look like a knit mandala, where it is smaller sections making larger sections, lace section, and then a more dense section, and then a whole picot pointy triangular border. Lots of options.
Well, it's very cool. I
Yeah.
would love to have a true, instead of the stripes that she has, I would love to have one that's an actual spiral. A round
Ooh.
spiral blanket would be so cool. In my
Oh,
opinion.
okay. Yeah, that would definitely, you could just do that with just having the yarn be like a long color change. That would be really fun. The next shape I want to talk about is another very popular one in the shawl department, and that is triangles. So many shapes, like a perfect triangle, a long triangle, a weird winging out one side triangle. You can tell I know all of the technical terms of triangles.
Are a lot of those knit as squares and then folded over my body to make a triangle?
Nope, they are
No.
knit actually as a triangle. For example, I'm holding here my sun shawl.
Oh, yeah, that's a little triangle.
It's a triangle.
It's kind of like
Ta-da.
it's a little scarfy though.
Yeah, we can do whatever, but like there, And so then
Oh,
the
yeah.
triangle points down. It's a nice little fit here.
You're wearing it like a cowl.
Yeah, but it's a triangle, and I love triangular shawls. I have another one, shipped ashore shawl, that looks like a sail. So that was like very appropriate.
My husband crocheted a triangular, very large pineapple stitch shawl that's really beautiful. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
big old triangle, and he just wraps it around himself.
Yeah, it's so
But it's big
good.
enough to be almost a poncho, but it's not. It's a shawl.
Sure. It can be as big as small as you want it to be. That's great. The thing about this one is it started with just like one stitch and then increases until you get to the end where there are all of these stitches. So that is what is making this shape by just increasing on the one side.
Now, would you say that is an equilateral triangle or it's an asymmetrical triangle? It's longer on one end than on,
Yes,
right?
it
Yeah.
has all three different lengths.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's really cool because so often we see people knitting or crocheting things that are like symmetrical triangles in
Oh,
one way or
yeah.
another. And I love that this is a asymmetrical triangle, which is way cool.
I find these fit better if they're the really long triangles. Then it's too long and it sometimes like gets between your legs. And I'm like, I don't
Right.
need my knit cowl all the way down there.
Yeah,
So
if you're gonna wear it like a cowl for sure. If you're gonna wear it as a wrap, you probably want it to be here.
better.
Yeah.
Yes, good point.
Triangles really incorporate the power of three. So since most of the time it's a equal-sided triangle or an equilateral triangle, that is indicative of the body, mind, spirit, or of the Holy Trinity. So it can be this sort of like divine connection. We find that triangles in the real world have amazing properties, especially in being a very strong structural, like a brace makes all braces often make triangles, and those tend to be very much more secure than a square.
Mm.
So triangles are very important in structural integrity. So they can be a really strong aspect. When we see the symbols for earth, air, fire, and water, they're glyphs, if you will. Those are often triangles. Fire and water are an upward and downward triangle, and then earth and air have a line through them, the upper and lower pointing triangles. So we could look at those triangles as symbolic of the elements. So if you have a triangle that's pointing up, that's a fire
Mm.
or transformation aspect. If you're going to wear a cowl or wear a cloak or a scarf or a poncho that's made out of a triangle, it's going to be pointing down. And so
Mm.
that's the symbol of water. So you could be thinking about that as an emotional comfort.
Oh, yeah.
So you could knit it up, intentionally putting sort of transformation. And then when you wear it down, it's carrying that idea of water and emotional
Oh.
comfort. So it could be
Mhm.
emotional transformation if you wanted to do that.
Whoa, way to layer it on. So smart.
If you
Great.
did a band of color work, either the top or the bottom, you can incorporate earth and air as you wear
Yes.
it or as you knit it.
So many great ideas.
Maybe I could be a knitwear designer, even if I don't knit.
Yeah, anyone can do it. It's so easy. We've come up with like 1,000 designs this season.
Right. Make me that pattern, Katie.
Fine, Jim. Wait till next season. You're gonna have a whole crap load of knit stuff you didn't actually want.
Hopefully.
All right, rectangles is the next one on the list, and rectangle is just a long square. Do they have the same correspondences, would you say?
It's actually the other way around. Squares are equal-sided rectangles officially. Or is it the other way around? Yeah, but
This
it
seems like a
is.
real chicken egg situation.
Yeah, I think rectangle is the umbrella term and square is a version of a rectangle with equal sides. That's my mathematical understanding from my engineering father.
I might be this many years old when I
What
learned that.
yeah, what does he know? He's just a rocket scientist.
They give that out to anybody.
Okay, so
Hmm.
the squares really rely on the right angles, and that's what determines whether something is a rectangle or if it's some other shape. So the idea that there's these 90-degree angles and it's something is square is our house is neither plumb or level or square because it was built in the 1920s. So we're always, if we have to fix something in the walls, we're always winging it. In any
Mm,
case, this is like the astrology. If you have a square in astrology, it's often a very fixed issue. There's often a block there or
mm.
a difficulty. But what can you do with blocks? You can
Build on
Yeah,
them.
so you can build your foundation, you can build your home, you can build protection. So there's a lot of ways to use the idea of a square as a foundation garment, as not a foundation garment, that makes it sound like lingerie, but as of as something symbolic of your grounding or of your foundation or of what you're building. And there's also this idea that the four sides could represent the four elements, especially if it is a square. You can
Oh.
also fold that square diagonally and it looks like a triangle. You can rotate that square 45 degrees and it looks like a diamond. So there's a lot of really cool stuff to do with squares that can give it additional meanings.
Ooh, yeah. And then you build squares on squares, and that creates a whole other shape,
Yeah.
especially if you are knitting. I don't know if it's a mitered square or what it is exactly, but there are designs out there where it is a square, but diagonal half, one color and then another color. And then you make a bunch of those and you lay those out, quilting piecework into
It
another shape.
reminds me of granny squares in crochet.
Yeah,
Or
very
even
similar.
remember when, and it's not a square, but remember when we talked about the beekeeper's quilt? And
Yes.
those were knitted hexagons
Yep.
that I think you stuff them a little bit. Don't you put a little batting in there or something?
You can, yes.
You can. And then they make it little puffy like a beehive. Couldn't you do that in any shape?
Certainly. Why not?
Right. So I think
Yes.
about the granny square quilt. I have a quilt on my bed that is a series of knitted squares that have patterns, just like you said,
Mm,
only it's all white and it's
yeah.
just bubbles and all kinds of little patterns in there. So really cool to think about how we can build things with squares, even if we were just knitting small ones, you
And
know.
I'm thinking as we're talking, like, oh my God, duh, these are foundational shapes. And what else are foundational things? Quite often you learn to knit while knitting
Swatches.
squares that then are seamed into a whole Afghan or something.
Yeah.
I know when I worked at Skacel, we published a book for a woman. It was the building blocks blanket. Duh. After you learn how to cast on and knit and purl, then this series of squares get harder and teach you new skills until at the end you have 12 of them, I think, and then you make it all into, you seam it into the blanket.
So it's
And
like a
that
sampler for cross stitch, except for
for
knitting.
knitting. Exactly.
It's
Yes.
genius. That is
Genius.
absolutely genius. Now I have a thing to do with my swatches. As I get better at knitting swatches, my quilt goes from lousy to pretty much on point.
And I think the more unique the swatches are, the better it is to scrappy quilt together because it has so much more character, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Who
Don't
wants
make
a
them all the
perfect
same.
who wants a perfect quilt?
I don't. Boring.
Every
Boo.
time I see those perfect things on Ravelry, I think, I hate it.
Oh, they're not perfect, trust me.
Teasing.
It's just perception.
Good photography.
That's right. Let's talk about not a circle, but a Möbius.
Oh, right. If you take a long rectangle, like a scarf, give it a half twist and sew it together, you have what is called a Mobius strip. And the
Yes.
unique thing about a Mobius strip is you could do this with a piece of paper, a strip of paper also. If you start drawing a line on one side, you'll eventually meet that line because there's only one side to that strip. It's a way to create sort of a figure eight.
It's the infinity symbol, which I guess makes sense if you're always meeting again your end. Jim, there are two ways that as a knitter, you can emulate this. So the first method is something that if you don't do intentionally will really ruin your day. And that is when you join, let's say, a cowl in the round. So you're making it into the circle for the first time. If you are not very careful that all of your stitches are pointing down, you could accidentally make it into a Mobius by not realizing that your stitches are going around the needle at some point. And then that's a big problem because if you've ever worn a shirt with a twist in it, it's not cute.
Interesting.
Yes. If you want to make a Mobius, the easy way to do it is put that half twist in the knitting before you do the first round of knitting. So you like lock it in. However, there is a much more complicated way to knit a Mobius, and it is a Mobius cast on. And it requires a really super long needle, like 60-inch needle, and this pretty complicated cast on technique, which we didn't even talk about in the cast ons because it was so elaborate, to make a true Mobius that you knit in that shape. It is wild, Jim. You should Google
Wow.
it. It's crazy.
What
Yeah.
would I Google?
Mobius cast on?
The Mobius cast on. Oh,
Yes.
wow.
I don't know if Kat Bordy figured this out, but I know I learned it from her, and that's the instruction that I learned from. And we'll put a picture here of an example too, if you're like, what are we even talking about?
I love the picture because it does this in the front. It like overlaps, but then you see that it's just curled under. How did you do that without actually having two ends?
Exactly.
So it's very cool. The magical associated with the Mobius or the infinity symbol, the lemniscate. This is obviously a symbol of the infinite, the connection to the divine, the power from the universe, inspiration, elevation, enlightenment. A lot of times in witchy circles, we might think of the infinite as an image of the goddess, as the infinite mother, the infinite provider, or the power of the universe, as an
Mm.
infinite inspiration. So if you're looking for that vibe, it would be really cool to create something like this. Of
Ooh,
course, if I was doing it, I would create a very long strip and then give it a half twist and just stitch it together at the ends because I don't have the skills to do the magical
yeah.
Mobius cast on.
It takes some trial and error, even for the best of us. So that's a smart way to set yourself up for success, Jim.
But I love this that there's these challenge, like these amazing complex things is so cool. And how magical is that to be doing that with intention? Wow.
Yeah. I always think of the strength card from the tarot whenever I think of the infinity symbol.
I think of the magician from the tarot also
Oh,
has the
right.
lemniscate above the head, which is access to all as above, so below. I can create anything. So both of
Mm,
those tarot cards have that infinity symbol above the head.
very cool. All right, let's wrap up with one more, and that is a star.
We talked a little bit about it earlier, sometimes called the pentacle or the pentagram. The star symbol by itself without a circle is often the pentagram.
Mm,
There's also a pentagon, which is a five-sided figure. Pentagram is a five-pointed figure. And so the pentagram is the smallest interlaced star symbol that you can make. And it has a lot of really cool mathematical and geometric uses. And it's been extrapolated on and studied. The Wikipedia article, which we have linked also, lots of links in this episode, by itself is fascinating. You'll see the pentagram symbol in papal seals. You'll see it in church rosettes. You'll see it in Christian symbology up until the modern times. So the idea that it's associated with satanic practices is a total invention, modern invention. This has often been a symbol of protection. It's been a symbol of great metaphysical and mathematical meanings. Today, we think of it as protective. We can think of the 5 points as being an idea of the outstretched human with the
yes.
arms, legs, and head. So, a symbol of humanity. It can be seen as a symbol of protection and of sacredness. It's also could be seen as the four elements and then the spirit added
Mm,
to that. So, five elements. Really a powerful symbol and really a universal symbol. So any of
yeah.
those could be incorporated into a piece that has a star, but are you knitting something in the shape of a star?
That's a great question. So you can. I have an
What?
example here where it's a three-dimensional star that is knit. And then, of course, you can also knit intarsia into something. It's not the shape of a star, but the colors are in the shapes of stars
Oh,
onto a
right. So,
yoke or something like that.
oh, I see. The star that is on this shooting stars pattern is an eight-pointed star.
Oh, and that's another thing. There are many star shapes and points. You can have many numbers of points, and then that again can influence what the intention is around that.
For sure. Any even number of stars is two independent shapes put together. So if you take two equilateral triangles, one pointing up, one pointing down, and put them on top of each other, that's the Star of David or the Seal of Solomon. If you take two squares and put them on each other, that is a eight-pointed star, which also has a lot of magical meanings. And as you go on with your hexagons and your octagons and everything else, and you put them and rotate them by a little bit, you'll have all these multi-pointed, even numbered of stars. And likewise, if it's an odd number of points, then you just make a star, but instead of stopping at 5, you stop at 7 or 9 or 11. So you get
Mm.
all of these little points.
Did you like the physical star? It looks like a decoration that you might do like a whole bunch of them. That would
Yeah,
be really fun.
I think those are Christmas ornaments, right?
They probably
It could
are, or
be.
certainly
Yeah.
could be if that's not what the intention was.
That would make a really great throw pillow if you made it big enough.
Oh, yeah, make it out of a jumbo yarn and like size 15 needles instead. Oh,
Yeah.
heck yeah.
How fun would that be to have like your tassels on your stocking cap with a star at the end?
You
Those would
could
be
even
really
put it as
fun.
like an applique somewhere. That would be fun.
That'd
Some
be
like
cute.
three-dimensional patch kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So many options, Jim.
So good.
I've so enjoyed doing these episodes with you, Jim. I'm always inspired at the end of each one. I'm like, "Ugh, I gotta make all these projects. I gotta start something with a million stars in the shape of a triangular circle."
I hope all of you listening are inspired. What are you inspired to make? Even if you don't make it, drop us a line and let us know what you're inspired to make as a result of this episode. I'd love to know.
And don't miss out on next week because we have on a very special guest
Oh,
to
that's
talk all about what we do when we're finished with knitting and ways to adorn it. And that is with our special guest, author Christy Johnson of Mystical
she's
Stitches.
so cool. We are going to be talking about this book
That's the one.
and how all about embroidery and embellishment. She's amazing. You're going to love it.
Join us next week when we interview Christy.
I can't wait, and I will see you then.
See you then, everybody.
Thanks for
Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed the show, consider sharing it with a friend, leaving a review on iTunes and Spotify, or following Knit a Spell on Instagram.
You can also subscribe to the Light from Lantern YouTube channel to enjoy full episodes of Knit a Spell and see our happy faces.
You can also learn more about readings, classes, and events going on with your favorite maker of magic, James Devine, by visiting thedivinehand.com and subscribing to his newsletter. Then follow Jim's fun and interactive Instagram account at DivineHandJim.
Keep up with Katie, the magical maker, by subscribing to her newsletter at lightfromlantern.com. You'll receive a free knitting pattern as a thank you gift. Then follow Katie on Instagram at lightfromlantern for even more magical making tips. See you next week.